Good evening, everyone. Today, 9th of April of 1865, the American Civil War has ended. No more will this conflict last, as now many people will finally get the rights they deserved after so long and be safe from conflict for a long time. Today, let's rewind and talk about what happened during this war and the effects it had. Abraham Lincoln won the election for president in 1860s. The majority of his votes came from the northeastern and midwestern states. Though the Republicans opposed the extension of slavery, upheld taxes, and supported the Federal Railroad project. Some Democrats called the Southern secession, while others wanted the preservation of the Union. Each faction was divided in different candidates. Stephen A. Douglas was the pro-union candidate, meanwhile John C. Breckinridge was the pro-secession candidate. Even when Lincoln was elected president in March of 1861, Confederate forces threatened Fort Sumter in Charleston. After Lincoln ordered a fleet to resupply, the Confederate artillery fired the first shots of the Civil War. Major Robert Anderson, Sumter's commander, surrendered after a day of bombardment. Virginia, Arkansas, North Carolina, and Tennessee joined the Confederate Army after this event, while states such as Missouri, Kentucky, and Maryland did not leave, but Confederate sympathy was still present. The Convention of the People of Florida assembled Tallahassee to vote on whether Florida should quit. On January 10, 1861, 62 delegates voted for secession, while only 7 voted against it. After a month of retreating, Florida joined 6 other southern states, forming the Confederate States of America. Jefferson Davis of Mississippi was inaugurated as President of the Confederate States at the Alabama Capitol. Florida's convention then adopted a new constitution that considerably altered the existing Florida Constitution by substituting Confederate States for United States. The 1st South Carolina Volunteer Regiment was an infantry that saw lengthy military service during the American Civil War. At first, enslaved people who had escaped or were freed from South Carolina and Florida were enlisted, beginning as a company by David Hunter. Officially declared on January 31, 1863, it was the second union comprised that made up entirely of blacks. James D. Fessenden took great interest in recruiting volunteers. Despite having fought in some battles, the regiment was not involved in leading companies during the war. The regiment's first commander was white, so an instruction issued by Confederate President Jefferson Davis on December 23, 1862, ordered that any Negro slave caught armed shall be delivered to the authorities of their respective states to be sold according to their laws. Meanwhile, the white officers would be sentenced to hang. The threat was not carried out. The regiment influenced how the states of the Union thought about the slaves who crossed their frontiers. At first, they returned them to their owners, but later they were considered criminals and used as workers. In the end, owners were allowed to join the army, but always in units made up of blacks and commanded by white officers. The First Battle of Bull Run is also called the Battle of Manassas. It was the first major land battle during the American Civil War. On July 21, 1861, Union and Confederate armies clashed in Virginia. Rookie Federal troops advanced against the Confederate armies at Manassas, Virginia, and despite their previous success, they were forced to retreat in Washington, D.C. The battle permitted a large number of people from Washington, including women and children, to come as spectators to witness the fight from a hill near where the battle took place. It is now referred to as the Battle of the Picnic. The Emancipation Proclamation was a presidential proclamation proclaimed on January 1st, 1863, and an executive order issued by Abraham Lincoln. It changed the legal status of about 3.5 million enslaved African Americans in the South, designated from slave to free. As soon as an enslaved person escaped the control of the Confederate government, the former slave was free, though it did not cover slaves in Union areas who were freed by state action. It was issued as a measure during the Civil War, directed at all the rebellious areas and components of the United States executive branch. Before this proclamation, under the Fugitive Slave Act of 1850, fugitive slaves were returned to their enslavers or held in camps as contraband for later return. This proclamation applied only to enslaved people on land controlled by the Confederates. Liberation in those places would come after state actions on the December 1865 ratification of the 13th Amendment, which made slavery, except for those convicted of a crime, illegal everywhere in the United States. After the war, Lincoln pushed the 13th Amendment to ensure the end of slavery throughout the United States. Congress passed this 13th Amendment with the necessary two-thirds vote on January 31, 1865, and it was ratified by every single state on December 6, 1865, finally ending legal slavery. This is it for today, everyone. This has been Hugo Romero, Jacksonville, Florida, for Florida News. America, the war is over.